It just appears there's just so much consumer backlash, public backlash, regulatory backlash. The ACCC taking Qantas to court over those allegations about fares for flights that didn't exist. Alan Joyce had always maintained that he wanted to really, go through right to his retirement date in November, but the public pressure has become so much that he's actually finishing up today. Vanessa Hudson takes over as chief executive effectively tomorrow, so 2 months ahead. So Alan Joyce is definitely not going out the way that he wanted after a 15-year career as Qantas chief executive.
Yeah, and interesting. I've just had a message from someone who had worked with him previously, and they've said, look, he turned around an airline that looked to have no future, that there will be a legacy that Alan Joyce has left. So not everyone was a detractor from that message.
Well, that's right. If you look at Alan Joyce's career through Qantas, you had the global financial crisis where the airline really got into strife like other global airlines around the world. And remember when Alan Joyce took on the unions and he shut down the entire airline globally and domestically as part of that fight, and that took a lot of guts as well. And then the pandemic, and it's true that Qantas went to the brink of insolvency like other airlines around the world, and Alan Joyce himself didn't take his bonuses, which are now controversial. He's received them. He didn't take any base pay during that, but he also got rid of a lot of Qantas staff, under fire about taking JobKeeper and not paying it back on behalf of Qantas. So there have been some major challenges. One of the toughest chief executives that you would ever come across. 15 years in that sort of role, a street fighting chief executive, but not going out the way that he wanted, 2 months ahead of schedule. So a tough decision, but one that's necessary given the pressure on the Qantas board just in recent days since those ACCC allegations emerged.
Yeah, and Peter, I'm just actually looking at a text that's come through from a friend of mine who works at Qantas. I'm looking at what's been sent out to all staff just in the last 10 minutes or so, and he's thanked them all for their passion and professionalism. It's a note from Alan Joyce himself, and he says he's sure the airline will rebound. But because of those issues you raised, shutting down the airline, I was actually in America at LA airport covering that story at the time. He did not have a lot of fans among staff.
No, look, certainly at war with the unions constantly. A lot of staff very upset with the outsourcing of different parts of the airline. Criticisms that the Qantas family was broken up as part of that outsourcing to keep costs down, and very, very controversial moves, but arguably necessary moves during the pandemic, but also criticism that Alan Joyce and Qantas didn't waste a crisis during the pandemic and use that to fulfil what Qantas had been long wanting to do in outsourcing. And of course, some of those axing of staff is subject to legal action at the moment, so you don't want to talk too much about that. But a tough job, a tough role, a tough day for Alan Joyce, not leaving the way that he really wanted to, going out as a bit of a victory parade, but perhaps shrinking away quietly, or a bit quieter than he had been expecting to.
I know you're going to have a really busy morning, Peter, on this, but just before you go, there's no mention of the bonuses in this statement to the stock exchange from Qantas. So is that still in play, do you think? Will there be any more announcements in regards to that?
Well, Alan Joyce received 1.7 million shares. That was announced in a stock exchange announcement on Friday, where he got about $10 million in long-term incentives. I understand his short-term incentives haven't been paid out. The board would have the option of clawing those back or not paying them. So similar actions we saw with the Commonwealth Bank in the money laundering scandal in 2015, where executives lost their bonuses altogether. So that's a possibility, but there's no doubt that Richard Goyder, the Qantas chairman, the Qantas board, under enormous pressure in relation to this, and they've acted and reached that agreement with Alan Joyce.